I'm Sandy West, and I'm going to talk about Occupy Wall Street. In 2011, Barack Obama was president. Americans were equally divided on their approval of the president, with 45% approving and 48% disapproving of his performance. The American economy was stagnant. Over 25 million people were unemployed, and 2.8 million homes were in foreclosure, while the investment bankers responsible for the economy were still receiving financial bonuses. Republicans gained the House, Democrats held the Senate. The Tea Party influenced the GOP. There were several high-profile union battles in several states. Obama was pushing for higher taxes on higher incomes, and the Arab Spring protests had occurred in the Middle East. Occupy Wall Street was a protest movement against inequality. About 1,000 protesters gathered on September 17, 2011, in Zuccotti Park in New York City's Wall Street financial district. Originally, the organizers had chosen One Chase Manhattan Plaza as a location for the protest, with Bowling Green Park as their second choice. The police discovered this before the protest started and fenced off the two locations. Zuccotti Park was private property, and the police could not legally force the protesters to leave. The main issues raised by Occupy Wall Street were social and economic inequality, greed, corruption, and the undue influence of corporations on government, particularly from the financial services sector. The OWS slogan, "We are the 99%, refers to income and wealth inequality in the U.S., between the wealthiest 1% and the rest of the population. Disparity in income distribution was a primary concern among Occupy Wall Street protesters. Income inequality in the U.S. rose dramatically between 1970 and 2010. By 2007, 1% of the population was earning 23.5% of the country's income. You can see by the graph on the left, between 1970 and 2010, that surge in the income of the top 1%. In 2008, Congress approved the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. This was in response to a financial crisis due to subprime mortgages, which threatened to collapse the American financial institution. In response, Congress authorized the purchase of several $100 billion in distressed assets from the financial institutions such as Lehman Brothers and the American International Group. Estimates for the total cost of the bailout to the government are as high as $29 trillion. The Occupy Wall Street protest was called for by Callie Lassin and Michael White of Adbusters, who proposed the protest on their website in February 2011 under the title "A Million Man March on Wall Street." Adbusters proposed a peaceful demonstration to protest corporate influence on democracy, the lack of legal consequences for those who brought about the global crisis of monetary insolvency, and an increasing disparity in wealth. In June of that same year, Adbusters emailed their subscribers saying, "America needs its own Tahrir." Tahrir refers to the Egyptian Revolution, which occurred in January in 2011. Millions of Egyptians from a variety of religious and socioeconomic backgrounds participated in nonviolent demonstrations, marches, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience against oppressive laws, police brutality, high unemployment, and low wages. The protest resulted in the resignation of then-President Mubarak. Worldwide, social media was being used to inspire demonstrations. Protests were taking place in authoritarian regimes in North Africa and the Middle East and were referred to as the Arab Spring. Leaders of the movement were Michael White and Callie Lassin. Micah is the co-founder and the only American creator of the Occupy Wall Street protests. He was born to an African-American father and a white mother. As the OWS movement gained momentum, White served as the group's unofficial publicist, using Adbusters' Twitter account to encourage activists. White was named one of the most influential people under 35 years of age by Esquire magazine in 2014. He published a book in 2016 titled The End of Protest, A Playbook for Revolution. Callie Lassin is the co-founder of Adbusters magazine, which he started as a means to support global environmentalism, anti-capitalism, and anti-consumerist movements. Lassin and the magazine are based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. According to Mackie, Lassin collaborated with Michael White, but has been careful not to claim ownership of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Goals of the Occupy Wall Street movement include reduction in the influence of corporations on U.S. politics, a more balanced distribution of income, forgiveness of student loan debt, bank reforms, especially to curtail speculative trading by banks, and alleviation of the foreclosure situation, and more and better jobs. And we'll revisit this slide towards the end of the presentation. As the protests progressed, they spread to other cities, such as Los Angeles, Boston, San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, and also internationally. Celebrities such as Kanye West, Michael Moore, Russell Simmons, David Crosby, Susan Sarandon, Jesse Jackson, and Alec Baldwin joined, increasing coverage of the events. In September of 2011, there were hundreds of protesters camping in Zuccotti Park. The park owners were becoming increasingly concerned about sanitation conditions. On October 13, 2011, New York City Mayor Bloomberg and park owners announced that the park must be vacated for cleaning. The protesters did not cooperate. In this slide, on the bottom left, there's a little sign that says U.S. financial collapse. And there's two kind of Rockefeller-looking guys standing on top looking over Zuccotti Park. And one of them is saying, "Look at the mess those protesters left behind." On November 15, 2011, the New York City Police gave protesters notice from the park owner to leave the park due to unsanitary conditions. An hour later, police in riot gear began removing protesters from the park. They arrested 200 people in the process. When the protesters were forced out of Zuccotti Park, they turned their focus to occupying banks, corporate headquarters, board meetings, foreclosed homes, and university campuses. On New Year's Eve of 2011, protesters started to reoccupy the park. Protests ensued with alleged reports of the police using pepper spray and one protester stabbing an officer in the hand with a pair of scissors, again alleged. Protesters continued returning to the park. New York City reports that since its inception, Occupy Wall Street has cost the city an estimated $17 million in overtime fees to provide policing of protests and encampment inside Zuccotti Park. And I think as Alaskans, we're kind of picturing this massive park, but you can see in the photo it's just really this little postage stamp corner. Outcomes of Occupy Wall Street include put the question of economic inequality in the U.S. front and center for the first time since the 1960s. It called attention to the impact of student loan debt on young college, professional, and trade school graduates who were faced with the double whammy of a stagnant job market and crippling debt. OWS resulted in the New York State Legislature increasing taxes in the higher brackets on New York residents. It strengthened collective bargaining and union recognition, and it focused attention on the issue of police brutality and the militarization of urban police forces. Occupy Wall Street is credited with the creation of Black Lives Matter, the ascent of Bernie Sanders, promotion of free speech, free expression, and assembly. It fueled a national conversation about the growing wealth gap, and it created the brand of the 99%. The Huffington Post reported the slogan, "We are the 99%, is arguably the most successful slogan since "Hell no, we won't go" of the Vietnam War era. The Occupy Wall Street movement came in like a lion and out like a lamb. It promoted self-expression and encouraged cultural change towards assembly. It didn't focus on any particular goals, legislation, or endorse any candidates. Some critics of the movement say that Occupy Wall Street was not significant in any aspect in the 2012 presidential race, that there were no lasting, centralized organization, powerful networks, leadership, or large-scale movements around the country, and the movement failed to engage with institutional politics. The federal minimum wage has stood at $7.25 for more than a decade. This is one of the biggest reasons the gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen. Inequality will go up as long as the people at the top of the income brackets continue to increase their wealth. The graph on the left shows the income of the top 1% in red, and as you can see, even since OWS in 2010, it's continued to increase. And the graph on the right is the share of income by the top 1% in 7 different countries. And you can see that America is in blue, and our income gap is increasing over time, where most countries show a significant decrease, especially like the United Kingdom and Germany. I believe this is significant for us as social workers, and it's the reason that I chose this movement. I'm not making a political statement or a political endorsement, but I feel like the United States is at a crossroads. So this slide shows on the left side the Occupy Wall Street goals, and on the right are Elizabeth Warren's goals. Elizabeth Warren is currently, as of the time that I'm writing this, it could change, the Democratic frontrunner for the 2020 presidential election. So I wanted to compare these side by side. The first goal of Occupy Wall Street was to reduce the influence of corporations on politics. And Elizabeth Warren has a similar goal to restrict corporate political activity. And she has an act that would do this by requiring companies to have 75% of their board agree before they make any political contributions or endorse candidates, which would make the process a little slower and a little more democratic. Occupy Wall Street has the goal to balance distribution of income, and Elizabeth Warren has a goal to propose a direct tax on wealth. Occupy Wall Street had a goal, the third one down, to forgive student loan debt, and one of Elizabeth Warren's platforms is the cancellation of student loan debt for 95% of the people who have student loans. Occupy Wall Street wanted bank reform, especially to curtail speculative trading, and Elizabeth Warren has bank reform in her party platform. She wants to rein in the private equity firms. Occupy Wall Street's goal is to alleviate the foreclosure situation and increase jobs, which is kind of what was a crisis at the time, but has kind of stabilized since then. Elizabeth Warren's goal is to put $2 trillion in clean energy and create a cabinet-level Department of Economic Development. So it's interesting, Elizabeth Warren does not lay any claims to the movement of Occupy Wall Street, and Occupy Wall Street does not lay any claims to Elizabeth Warren, so we'll really have to see how this plays out in the next year. Thank you very much. And here's some references that I could not put into the presentation. I cited some as I went, but then some of them got a little too lengthy to put on the little slides. Thank you.